Now, despite backlash following a resurfaced video which showed him admiring China's barbaric zero-COVID policy, Jeremy Hunt is ramping up his leadership ambitions. Insiders say the former long-serving health secretary is trying to pitch himself to the public as a, quote, safe pair of hands after Boris's turbulent time in Downing Street. And speaking on Sunday, he beamed as he refused to rule out himself out of a Tory future leadership race.
We can turn things around under the Prime Minister's leadership,
into
yes.
the next election? Is he the best person to lead the party into the next election?
I very much hope so.
You hope so? You don't hope to be doing it yourself?
Well, I know you would like to create a suggestion that I would want something different, but I really hope we can. But I do also hope we recognise that in order to do that, we have a big mountain to climb.
As he launches a new book on the NHS titled Zero, Hunt is generally seen as not tainted by the government's handling of COVID. But let's not forget that he made huge mistakes during his stint as Health Secretary, leaving the UK unprepared for the incoming pandemic. And, of course, damning footage from July 2020, which started recirculating online last week, shows him appearing to celebrate the inhumane Chinese zero-COVID approach.
I very much agree with the central point in Gabriel's paper that we should be aiming for zero infection and elimination of the disease, because that is basically the approach taken in countries which have a SARS strategy as opposed to a flu strategy. And those are the countries that have overwhelmingly been the most successful in tackling coronavirus. My sister lives in Beijing, and she flew back to Beijing in the middle of lockdown. And just to give you an idea of the contrast, she was escorted from the airport in Beijing to her home by Ministry of Health officials, and then put into her home for 2 weeks quarantine. The door was sealed, and she had a police car sitting outside her house periodically. And I'm not saying we go that far in this country, but I just think it's an indication of how serious they are in the countries that have had to deal with SARS about stopping at the root every possible source of infection.
Quite how much further Hunt would have gone on lockdowns in the UK, we will never know, as Boris thankfully defeated him in the leadership contest of 2019, sparing us from finding out. And not only is he a COVID zealot, the arch Ramona wanted a second Brexit referendum and would have overturned the greatest democratic mandate in our history given half a chance. No wonder the MSM are all over him. So, Brendan O'Neill, why is the media so obsessed with Jeremy Hunt as the next Tory leader, or is that pretty obvious?
Yeah, they love him because, as you say, he presents himself as a safe pair of hands, and he's seen as a moderate. He's seen as one of the adults in the room who can take over from crazy populist Boris Johnson. But as you've just outlined there, Jeremy Hunt has points of view which I would consider to be extremist. I think supporting zero COVID policies, openly celebrating the authoritarianism of the tyrannical regime in Beijing, and also arguing for a second EU referendum in which we could have had the option to stay in the single market in defiance of the vote to leave the EU. These are extremist positions. They suggest that Jeremy Hunt doesn't understand the importance of civil liberty or democracy. And for those reasons, he should not be the leader of anything.
Brendan, that is such a good point. It really is, because, of course, these positions are just completely extreme when you actually break it down. I mean, the zero COVID thing, you just have to look at the guy's face to know that that's what he would have been angling for if he were in charge.
Oh, yeah, the way he was almost smiling and taking joy in his description of his sister's experience in China. She was driven to her home. There were people waiting outside. The door was sealed. I mean, he had a smirk on his face as he was saying that. He clearly thought it was an admirable, tough approach. I think it's a crazy approach. It completely destroys people's freedom of choice, people's freedom of movement, people's right to decide where they go on a day-by-day basis. And you only have to look at what's been happening in Shanghai over the past few months, where they have had zero COVID policies, and they are destroying people's lives. People have got no freedom whatsoever. Numerous people have lost their businesses or their jobs. We've seen dogs being killed in case they pose a threat. People haven't been allowed to enjoy the most basic freedoms that we know, such as leaving your house, going to the shops. This is the kind of zero COVID, this is the logical conclusion to the zero COVID idea that was being pushed by Jeremy Hunt and other people in this country. I don't think anyone who argued for zero COVID deserves to be taken seriously again.
No, they got it completely wrong. We also know that anyone who argued to overturn the biggest democratic mandate in British history should be called out. And that's why I think Starmer is not fit to be Prime Minister, because he didn't trust the vote of the British people. He wanted a second referendum. And what's interesting, Brendan, is Jeremy Hunt did too. So not the sort of second referendum that Starmer wanted, but he wanted a second vote on the exact terms of the referendum, which did include remaining in the single market, right?
Absolutely, which to my mind is a second referendum in all but name. He wanted another vote. He argued for it quite soon after the referendum itself, saying that we should have a vote on the terms of our leaving, and it should probably include the right of people to vote to stay in the single market. Of course, if you vote to stay in the single market, you're voting to stay in the European Union, beholden to the European Union's rules and regulations and freedom of movement, and also the rule of the European Court of Justice. That's what it means to be in the single market. So he was, in a fairly slippery way, arguing for a referendum that would allow us to overthrow the spirit of the first referendum. So, as I was saying, I'm sick and tired of populists and Brexit voters and people who are sceptical of the lockdown being called the extremists and the lunatics. I think the most deranged positions we've seen in this country over the past few years is firstly the attempt to overthrow the largest democratic vote in the history of this country, and secondly, the idea that we should have had lockdown forever and ever until COVID was eliminated, which is what Jeremy Hunt says in that video. To my mind, those are the really problematic positions politicians have taken. Jeremy Hunt was at the forefront of both of them, or at least he expressed support for both of those ideas. I don't want him running the Tory party, certainly not running the country.
You are so right, Brendan O'Neill. The Tory party is finished if Jeremy Hunt is in charge, but I don't think they'll be that stupid. Pray.